So somehow I started playing Overwatch again. I don't really know how it happened, it sort of just did. I mean, that's not entirely true. I played Melee for a bit, I still do, I'm just terrible at it. Fell back into League pretty hard for a while, and that did not end well. Not really a fan of either Battle Royale game, so I guess this is kind of just the natural progression of things. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm an addict, and on some weird level, I need a game that will manipulate my brain's reward system, and Overwatch does that to a decent degree. League does that to a severe degree. That's probably what brought this whole permaban thing about, which honestly has been a blessing in disguise, because on a deeper level than my video game addiction lies the level where I fucking hate League of Legends. But my deeply fueled rage towards League of Legends is not what this video is about. I wanted to talk about a couple specific design decisions made by Blizzard that I think have a very wide-reaching effect on both the community of Overwatch as well as how the game is played in a competitive setting. So, when you look at most modern first-person shooters, most modern video games actually, they all generally have one thing in common: a scoreboard. Hold tab, hold back, press start, whatever it is, you can push a button and see how you're doing. See how your team is doing. League of Legends, Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, Rocket League, Halo, fucking Splatoon, all these games have a scoreboard. Overwatch does not have a scoreboard. Let me repeat that. Splatoon, the game where you play as freaky squid children who paint the floor with their squid jizz and can swim inside the walls, has a scoreboard, and Overwatch does not. Why? It doesn't seem to make any sense. Overwatch did not accidentally become an esport either. It's not comparable to games like Rocket League or Melee where advanced techniques were discovered and a competitive scene happened to emerge. Whether Blizzard cares to admit it or not, this game was heavily designed with competition in mind, so why did they make the decision to not include a scoreboard? Why am I unable to see how many kills my Widowmaker has, if my Moira is even bothering to heal or just dealing damage, if my tanks are tanking? In a game which relies so heavily on using a correct team composition, where every role in the game depends on one another to perform at a certain level, Overwatch would benefit from a scoreboard far more than many of the games I mentioned previously. Take a look at the scoreboard in Call of Duty and ask yourself the question, what value does this provide me, the player, in winning this game? The answer? Not much. In a competitive setting, it can tell you how well you're playing based on kill-to-death ratio and how well your teammates are doing by the same metric. If someone's dying too much, maybe you can tell them to try to die less or to get more kills, but that should be their objective anyways. The team scoreboard in COD doesn't necessarily allow you to make more informed decisions about your team structure. Call of Duty doesn't really focus on team structure as it is, at least not nearly to the extent that Overwatch or League of Legends does. Now, what could a scoreboard in Overwatch be? Well, there's loads of things that could be displayed, but for the sake of this video, let's say each player's eliminations, deaths, damage done, and healing are displayed, as those are probably the most important metrics. Now let's take a look at League of Legends. League is very similar to Overwatch in the sense that each role depends heavily on one another performing well. Supports should heal and shield, AD carries should deal damage, tanks should take damage. But let's look at the scoreboard in League. The only things we're able to see in terms of how a player is performing is creep score, item build, and the player's KDA. They don't show damage done, healing done, damage taken, none of that. So why is the lack of a detailed scoreboard limiting to Overwatch, but not as much to League? What's the primary difference between League and Overwatch? If we strip away the gameplay mechanics and look at these games as two team-oriented, class-based games, we see they're very similar. Both games have a set of unique characters, each unique character fills some sort of role, and each team is made up of characters who fit these roles. You need a top laner and a jungler in League, you need a tank and a healer in Overwatch. With this in mind, now what's the primary difference between the two? Well, in Overwatch, if my Mei is getting destroyed by their Widowmaker, I can just as easily switch to Winston or D.Va and be just fine. In League, if my Caitlyn is dying to LeBlanc over and over, there's not much I can do other than to try to not die, which, again, is my objective anyways. Now, I won't argue that there would be no benefit to a more advanced scoreboard in League. More information in games is rarely a bad thing for players so long as it's presented in a way that makes it useful. But I will argue that it would not serve the game nearly as well as an advanced scoreboard would in Overwatch, on the premise that Overwatch allows you to switch characters and roles mid-match. If tanks feel like they're not getting healed enough, if healers feel like DPS aren't doing enough damage, if your Genji claims to be carrying but is 1 in 13, An advanced scoreboard would be a very easy way to verify this. To say, hey Mercy, you look like you're having a rough time. Did you want to try DPS and I'll heal this round? It seems obvious, right? It seems obvious that a scoreboard would greatly benefit Overwatch, so why did Blizzard make the choice to not include one? They can't claim ignorance. What they did so clearly goes against the grain set out by all other games that it had to be intentional, so why did they make this choice? I'm not going to claim that I ran an in-depth research on this topic, but I will say that if you Google, why does Overwatch not have a scoreboard, the top results are just people asking the same question. Overwatch began official development sometime in 2013 and was released in May of 2016. It was during this time that League of Legends was at its peak, king of the gaming landscape. It was also roughly during this time that my least favorite word of recent memory became popular: toxic. In the early days of League, Riot made the decision that they weren't going to enforce a meta on the game. As such, they didn't include the ability to select the role you wanted to play until somewhat recently. This led to popular sayings like mid or feed, AD or AFK, people refusing to play support, and Riot had to deal with this. Certain people would intentionally play badly, feeding the enemy kills and gold, and make their teams have next to no chance of winning. This is roughly where the word toxic sprouted up. It was used as a way to describe players who held games and their teams hostage if they didn't get their way or if they were just being whiny bitches. Riot heavily encouraged their player base to report these toxic behaviors, and rightfully so. It was a really shitty thing to deal with at the time, and it still is, although these things do seem to occur far less frequently. Looking back on it now, I kind of think they might have taken the wrong course of action. Their thought process was to deal with the people who were being toxic instead of looking at the potential reasons in their own game that might bring about these actions. People said mid or AFK because they wanted to play mid lane and probably sucked at everything else. No one wanted to support because support was boring as hell at the time. These issues have since been resolved and you can pick roles you want to play, and support is actually pretty fun, but all these changes came after the whole toxicity thing came about. The biggest game in the world looked at their community and said, these actions are toxic, these people are toxic, report them, but don't say anything back. If someone calls you a faggot and tells you to kill yourself, well then by golly gee, by the Summoner's Code, you report them and mute them and you go along with your day. Because if you call them an asshole, that's a bannable offense. And that's just not a fun thing to deal with. Well, alright, someone calling you a faggot unprovoked, I suppose, could lend itself to being toxic. I'd just consider the person being shitty, but in any case, we've now extended our use of the word toxic to include our initial group of people who affect your ability to win games, now onto people who are shitty in chat. Well, what about when somebody picks Jungle Malzahar? Is that toxic? What if somebody plays AD Soraka? Is that toxic? If I tell my top laner to stop dying when he's 0-5, am I being toxic? The word's usage spread like wildfire, and now almost everything you do that isn't being the nicest person you can be and playing meta champions can be called toxic. Whether the word is being used correctly or as it was originally intended didn't matter, and reducing toxicity became the new thing to do in gaming communities. So let's go back to Overwatch and say, okay, this game was in development during the time League was extremely popular, and also during Riot's renegade against toxicity. So I'd imagine if I was Blizzard and I was making a game with heavy similarities to League of Legends, noting the issues League has had to deal with its community, I'd probably ask the question, what can we do to reduce toxicity? And this is where I think the scoreboard, or rather the lack of one, came into play. What if you can't see if a teammate is playing poorly? If I can't see that my Ana has bronze healing, I can't target her for that, right? And if there's no verifiable way to prove my teammates are playing badly, the amount that people attack others for underperforming should be reduced. This should in turn reduce toxicity, right? Well, not really. What the lack of a scoreboard in Overwatch did, instead of creating a blameless environment, had the complete opposite effect. You see, instead of having a situation where 5 people could blame one person for not playing well enough, we now have an environment where 6 individuals can blame everyone else on their team for playing badly. If you're dying as a tank, blame your healers. If you're a healer dying to a tracer, blame your DPS. If you're playing DPS and you can't kill anyone on their team, blame the other DPS. And I'm not going to sit here and say that anyone making these claims in a match is wrong. I'm saying there's no way for them to be proven right. And that's really the heart of the issue. Overwatch is a blameless game. And if the lack of a scoreboard wasn't bad enough, Blizzard went further and gave individual players gold and silver medals for doing what their character is designed to do. A Mercy having gold healing or a soldier having gold damage doesn't mean they're playing well, but that's precisely the message being sent to the players by the developers. Is this really better than the opposite? Is giving power and reward to the individual better than giving it to the team? It certainly hasn't reduced toxicity. Overwatch is well known for having one of the most toxic communities out there, so if that was their original intent, A for effort, but you guys really shit the bed on that one. I'll maintain that having an advanced scoreboard in Overwatch would overall be a benefit to the game and its community. Players should not be afraid to be called out for not playing well enough. This is a competitive game, and the people on your team are trying to win. And if you are afraid of it, fucking mute everyone in the game and just play. I do that shit all the time. But if you want to be part of the team, if you want to have the best shot at winning, understand that there are things you can do to play better, to be better. And I think having a scoreboard would be a great way to make this happen more often. As always, I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.